ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, welcome to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gowri here today on your ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. And hope you guys are feeling good today. It's a Friday. Tomorrow onwards will be a long holiday, especially with Deepavali coming up next week. And I'm all excited about that as well. And let's move on to our news commentary for this morning, where we have news from Indonesia. They are reopening their Bali airport after a 2-day closure. And the airport had initially been ordered to remain shut until at least Friday morning, but improved conditions led to flights resuming much earlier than expected. And the airport reopened about 2:30 p.m. yesterday, and it has been closed since late Tuesday. Actually, officials had ordered it to remain shut, and nearly 700 flights, including 320 international ones, were cancelled between Tuesday and Thursday. And the mass cancellations, of course, definitely ended up in a lot of travel chaos for thousands of stranded passengers in the Bali airport, including India's Vice President Muhammad Hamid Ansari, who wrapped up a state visit Wednesday and was due to depart the holiday island, but his flight was also grounded. And it seems like air traffic is not something unusual for the air traffic to be disrupted by volcanic eruptions. It has been happening quite regularly because Indonesia, as it is, sits on the belt of seismic activity that runs around the Pacific Ocean and is home to the highest number of active volcanoes in the world. And Indonesia has at least 130 volcanoes there. The disruption also prompted a lot of organizers of high-profile United Nations conference in Bali to postpone the event, and that was also supposed to be attended by the Indonesian President Joko Widodo and philanthropist Melinda Gates. So for those of you stranded in the Bali airport, so happy for you that the flights have resumed and you can continue with your journey not undisrupted. And we have another news where President Obama will be the first president to visit Laos. He will be visiting Laos when he attends the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN Summit, in the country next year. And Deputy Security National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes told a think tank audience in Washington on Wednesday that this historic visit could sense a potential in the relationship between the U.S. and Laos for the first time after a very, very long period. And Rhodes said that an emerging partnership is definitely inevitable, and they could focus on development between the countries, focusing on areas like health, nutrition, as well as basic education, because the U.S. is actually increasingly becoming a real partner to the Lao government. And just back from his own Southeast Asian trip, in part to lay the ground for the ASEAN meeting next year, Rhodes also told the Center for Strategic and International Studies that the U.S. Is looked at through a historical lens in the region, and in Laos especially, it's being looked at with very ugly historical lens. Of course, they are often associated with the bombs that fell during the U.S. invasion in Laos back in the 1970s during the Vietnam War. But Rhodes also said that efforts by a lot of U.S. young leaders are actually changing that perception. A lot of young people are actually participating in a lot of programs extending into Southeast Asia, especially Laos, and they are sort of helping to mend that perception about the U.S. Of course, this happened all the way back in 1970s, and things are definitely not the same again. And of course, speaking of that, he also had to comment on the Myanmar elections, which is happening this Sunday, and international monitors are getting access they need to polling stations. He said that the rest of the world would have a credible set of facts to deal with after the vote. The election will take place, and although there have been a lot of reports of potential violence, there's also been some reports that there could be a possible backlash against the Muslims, and also worries about the integrity of the voter rolls themselves. Although Myanmar officials have pledged that the votes will definitely be free and fair, but I think not only Rose but all of us are quite concerned about Myanmar, since they have been under military rule for so long, and we don't know how exactly they going to break away from that and immediately promise a free and fair elections for everyone in the country. And he also cautioned that Myanmar still has a culture in which a campaign speech can actually turn into incitement to violence. Talking more about Myanmar elections, let's move to another news coming from the United Nations themselves, where they are raising alarm in regarding the Muslim hatred in Myanmar. This is another issue when it comes to the elections. A lot of the Muslim communities in Myanmar still don't really feel like they are safe or they are being protected by the government. So at the end of the day, they are really questioning what's the point of having these elections, electing a new leader, if we don't even feel safe coming out of the house. But it works both ways. All the more reason for them to come out and vote if they don't feel safe with the current administration. And these UN advisors have expressed alarm at reports of increasing advocacy of religious hatred, especially against the Muslims in Myanmar ahead of the coming elections. And the advisors also warned in a joint statement that such advocacy by religious leaders, religious groups, and even political parties may constitute incitement to violence and is definitely prohibited by the international law. And the advisors are trying to urge Myanmar's government to publicly condemn and counter any speech that suggests any kind of violence or hostility against this minority group. And they also urge the people of Myanmar to use these elections to show that Myanmar can actually be a nation of tolerance and peace. And of course, Myanmar is predominantly Buddhist, but they are also transitioning from a dictatorship to a democracy, and which is why these elections is so important for Myanmar. And the United Nations is also urging the leaders who will form the new government to show a commitment to democracy, to the rule of law and human rights. I think Myanmar so far has not done quite well in any of those areas, especially in terms of human rights. When you talk about the Rohingya in the Rakhine state, and also the Muslim communities who are marginalized and who don't feel safe to leave their homes to go out and vote for elections. Whoever that will be in charge of Myanmar next has a lot to do in terms of protecting the fundamental rights of the people in Myanmar, not just for one specific community, but for everyone, the whole nation, regardless of race and religion. And before we wrap things up for our political segment, we have ASEAN ministers, ASEAN transport ministers to be more specific, who are meeting to iron out details of their regional master plan. So what's happening here is all the 10 ministers from the 10 ASEAN countries, as well as their dialogue partners, including China, Japan, and South Korea, are all expected to iron out the details of a regional master plan over 2 days of talk. And this is in hopes to finalize the Kuala Lumpur Transport Strategic Action Plan, which is a 10-year master plan for transportation in the region between 2016 and 2025. And the Malaysian Transport Minister, Leow Tong Lai, said it's an overall plan that covers connectivity, that covers how we connect with China, Japan, Korea, and as well as how we can enhance our economic growth. And this strategic plan is also referred to as the ASEAN Strategic Transport Action Plan, which calls for greater connectivity, efficiency, integration, safety, and sustainability of the ASEAN transport. Mr. Liao also added that an efficient and integrated transport system is imperative for ASEAN to improve our economic competitiveness and facilitate integration with the global economy. And I could not agree more with him. We have the ASEAN Economic Community happening real soon. And one way, probably the easiest way to achieve an integrated community is definitely through a very detailed and extensive connectivity plan, because at the end of the day, connecting all 10 countries is the best way to make it easier to mobilize goods, services, free flow of labor, as what is the goal of the ASEAN Economic Community. So we'll talk more about the AC when we come back, also about the TPP, which full text was released yesterday. For now, I'm gonna play you a couple of songs. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back shortly.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're good, Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, and I'm here to bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. And earlier we left off our discussion touching a little bit on economy, AEC, and right now we're gonna move on to what has rocked social media yesterday, which is the TPP trade deal. So Obama's administration finally releases the text to the TPP trade deal. And the TPP was released yesterday, the full text, and of course it was widely shared all over Twitter and Facebook. And it was something that a lot of the countries have been waiting for, especially Malaysia. We have been in the dark about most of the negotiations about the TPP so far. It's been done behind closed doors, and there's been a lot of protest as well against TPP. Even when Obama had his visit here early last year, there were a group of students who actually stood up in the middle of his speech and said no to TPP. So this is a 12-nation deal that focuses on it touches on 40% of the global economy, and the provisions of the deal would knock down tariffs and import quotas, making it cheaper to import and export, as well as it aims to open new Asia-Pacific markets. And negotiations have been going on for years, led by the United States and Japan, with China conspicuously absent from the list, of course. And the opponents of the deal are contending that the TPP might actually cause overseas job losses, and it could also depress the wages, since U.S. businesses will be better able to take advantage of low-wage workers in developing economies. Supporters of TPP have been saying that it will actually make it easier for U.S. businesses to sell overseas, opening up international markets, just as the U.S. market is already open to imports from these 11 other countries. And if passed by the Congress, TPP would rank as one of President Barack Obama's major second-term policy accomplishment, as well as it will also signature a part of his legacy. And Obama's own party has actually largely abandoned him on the issue. And all three candidates for the presidential nomination, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley, have announced their opposition to the TPP, citing concerns about the lack of protections for American workers. I think this is not only a concern for American workers, it's a concern for most of the countries who are signing TPP, because once you sign up for this, because it makes it so easy for companies to come and go, be it American companies or any other companies for that matter. Let's just say the company gets set up and they hire a few workers. They can just leave anytime and close down the company if they don't feel like it's working out. And in that case, what's actually going to happen to all the workers who probably left their previous job to work in these promising companies? They probably work there for a few months and then get cut off, and which is why it's a huge concern when it comes to job employment or even workers' rights when it comes to signing the TPP. And the TPP is available online. Of course, you can access it. We have also published it on our Durian ASEAN a Facebook page. And apart from that, the TVP, it seems that there's been a lot of synopsis being released as well, a lot of cheat sheets. You can definitely read some of those in Durian ASEAN. And now moving on from that, still on the TVP, but we're talking more about labor reform in Vietnam, how it's tied to the Pacific trade deal, and also on Hanoi's follow-up on that matter. So a pact between Washington and Hanoi to strengthen labor unions in Vietnam could give workers a greater bargaining power, but the impact will still depend on how Vietnam carries out the agreement, a long-time Vietnamese advisors and other experts said on Thursday. The side agreement to the TPP actually calls for Vietnam to pass legislation that would legalize independent unions, allow them to go on strike, and let them seek help from foreign labor organizations. And this overall trade agreement faces a very contentious debate in the United States Congress. Vietnam's constitution enshrines the rights of workers to strike and engage in organized protest. But Vietnam has also adopted a few laws to codify and protect those rights, and consequently the Labour Accord is a very positive step for Vietnam. I completely agree with that as well. There's a big promise here when you look at the effect of signing the partnership, where it could actually work out well for Vietnam because protecting the rights of your workers is one of the important things when it comes to job employment, or even workers working in your country or overseas, and the fact that they are allowed that it enshrines the rights of workers to strike and engage in organized protests, and the fact that they can also seek help from foreign labor organizations could be a positive move for Vietnam. The central question, he said, though, however, is which the trade agreement will actually increase the influence and the independence of labor unions. Can this actually work? A lot of multinational companies have shown a lot of interest this autumn in investing in Vietnam, and this anticipated labor provisions of the trade have also caused a little concern among the companies. And for the past decade, factories in Vietnam have faced numerous wildcat strikes each spring, sometimes involving thousands of workers at a single location. Vietnam has, of course, some administrative regulations for holding the strikes, but they are so bureaucratic that workers seldom ever follow them, which is why the Vietnamese government has tolerated all these wildcat strikes as a way for workers to just let off steam and to demand raises, particularly during high inflation period in Vietnam. So I guess to sum it up, it will be a big challenge for Vietnam when you talk about national benefit, integration with the world, especially when it comes to the rights and benefit of the labor. They have to find a solution, apply the agreement, and this could actually turn out very well for the workers in Vietnam. So we are going to take another short break. When we come back, we'll move on to the arts and culture side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, only on Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. And for this part of our news commentary, we are going to move on to the arts and culture side of Southeast Asia, and starting with the news from Thailand, where their English proficiency has dropped and they are now the third worst in Asia. And Thailand fell to 62nd out of 70 nations in English proficiency, and is now the third worst country in Asia on education's first annual English proficiency tax. And Thailand's English proficiency remains low despite the country's large tourism industry, stated the report from EF, Education First, an international education company which specializes in language training, educational travel, academic degree programs and cultural exchanges. And Thailand's school system performs very poorly on international assessments across all subject areas. The average years of schooling there is also much lower than the regional average, meaning that the Thai adults are actually slightly less educated than their other Asian counterparts. And of course, there's a lot of factors that contribute to this, and one obvious one could be the very low gross national income per capita, which means that not everyone can actually invest in schools or in private tutoring to make sure that they keep up or improve their English proficiency. Well, so far only the rich and the elite can invest in private schools and English tutoring. And current government now has also mandated that schools align their English teaching to the common European framework of reference for languages in order to standardize teaching nationally. And the country's decline in English proficiency can also be seen in age breakdown, where the youth from 18 to 20 years old and the adults from 21 to 25 years old actually exhibit much poorer English skills than those in the 26 to 30 years of age bracket. Well, it seems that a few countries continue to debate also on whether or not English should be taught or whether it's important at all. Instead, discussions of English instruction in public schools, which focus on which dialect of English is taught, how it's assessed, how much education is needed, all this is often up for debate. But I think that we don't really have to look at it as a colonial language or something that the British used when they were here. I think the fact remains that most of the information available online is in English, and it is a widely spoken language, so it's good for people to pick up or be proficient in English merely for the opportunities that it presents, and especially if you venture, if you want to go out and work in other countries, the most common go-to language is actually English when you go to a country where you don't speak their own native language. And globally, both these age groups, like I mentioned earlier, can do better, of course. They have been basing this on international TOEFL and IELTS scores in Thailand. Thailand came in 76, respectively. And I think they definitely need to do something about this, especially when it comes to the young people between 18 to 20 years old. I think that's the age where you're going off to universities and you're meeting new people, probably traveling as well. And especially if you go to an English-speaking country to further your studies, you really, really need to master the language. Otherwise, a lot of information trying to pass it on to you will be lost in translation. And Thailand definitely has a lot of potential, a lot of tourists, like the study mentioned earlier as well. And it shouldn't be so difficult for them to actually pick up the language. And hope General Chowder, the Prime Minister, will do something about this and help to improve Thailand's rating in the next annual rating. And moving on to Singapore, not very positive news from Singapore either, where they have migrant workers suffering from extreme stress. And many of these migrant workers in Singapore are under significant mental and emotional stress, according to a university study released on Wednesday. And this university is actually the Singapore Management University, and it questioned more than 600 South Asian migrant workers. Found that they faced problems including high levels of debt, fears of repatriation, and massive agent fees. And Singapore's Ministry of Manpower said that it would respond once the official report is released. I think not only in Singapore, migrant workers all over the region are probably stressed out because they're away from the family, and they have to earn a certain amount of money so they can send some back home and use some to sustain themselves. But at the rate that this is going, we know that a lot of Southeast Asian countries are addicted to cheap labor, and it's not really as it is or as they were promised initially. When it comes to the payment or even their living conditions can be terrible at times. they have to cram in one room, 6 of them in one room, no proper electricity or water. And this is definitely something that ASEAN is also looking to address, especially with the ASEAN Economic Community set to realize next year. That'll be all for our arts and culture side of Southeast Asia. Before I wrap things up, of course, Myanmar elections is happening this Sunday. Good luck to everyone in Myanmar. I hope you do your study and think it through. Hope you make a good the best decision that you see fit for Myanmar, the transitioning into a democratic nation, and we're all looking forward to see the outcome of the elections this Sunday. And of course, to everyone celebrating Deepavali next week, of course, it's a bit too early, but happy Deepavali in advance as well. You can leave any comments, feedbacks on our social media channels. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Just look for Durian ASEAN. And if you're on the go, you can also download our very own Durian ASEAN app on your mobile phones. So we have another interview coming up at 9 o'clock later where we discuss Brazilian waxing, a very, very interesting, probably a little controversial topic to discuss, but that's coming up real soon. So stay tuned to Durian ASEAN.